Here we go.
Alright. Well, so the first thing we're going to do is lay on some cyan. I'm going to do this a bit differently. So now that I can sort of see what the camera can see, you can pretty clearly see the graphite lines. I erased some of the graphite, and I kind of want to see what happens, if anything, to the paper. The eraser I'm using is one of these guys, which you can only get from Jerry's Artorama, which is an inferior website to its competitors, but has some stuff that is exclusive to them. Well, anyway, you can definitely see where we had that bleed we were talking about last time. That's going to be fine. I'm going to use cyan to build up the edges of these flowers. All in all, it could have turned out worse. I'm going to dry off the paper and probably just cut that out because I don't really like fast forwarding. And then, yeah, hopefully we shouldn't have some horrible contamination like last time. But as I said at the end of the last video, I thought it was important that people see the genesis of the flower. My phthalo blues really... Phthalo blues, the most heavily staining of these pigments, and kind of, I think, of every pigment, the phthalocycline, I think it is the most staining pigment, so that means you should be the most careful with it. And sometimes with watercolor you have time to pull up a pigment with like a piece of paper or something, like a piece of paper towel. You don't with phthalo blue. It's pretty much staining as soon as it hits. You can use heavily sized paper, and I think that might give you a second, but I don't really know. I haven't used, it's like Whatman paper used to be a brand, and now there's another brand that makes a paper that's similar, but it's expensive and it's cold press, and I normally use hot press. So yeah, that looks really blue. I should stop talking the royal we. I did the yellow as the base because yellow is kind of the weakest of these colors as far as tinting strength, I think. And at least the size of the particles is the largest, and so you end up using more paint, and you kind of want to lay it down first. It also makes it look like, since you can sort of see every layer in a way, it makes it look bright or vibrant. Or people often paint people's faces and start with the yellow layer, so it looks like there's light coming through it. That's a little bit of contamination there. I can go over that with a smaller brush and like a heavy pigment later, and that'll be just fine. So, I think I'm just going to sort of move on. I think I'm never going to be happy with the coherence I'm speaking at, and I'm always going to want to move on to sort of related topics of the various things. Except I think my discussion of trains was pretty decent. I think I got everything there is to get really about trains. I guess I could go into specifics or perform an experiment to prove my claims, but that probably won't be necessary. The first thing I was going to talk about is, I mentioned it last time, and I think everyone's probably heard of it. And it's the idea in politics of an urban-rural divide, and you see this in every country I've ever I studied. I don't know. I haven't really looked into modern Middle Eastern states, but states in Europe and Australia, Canada, like they have this sort of, basically people vote differently rurally than they do in cities. Rural voters tend to be more conservative. Why this matters is this is sort of the central play of our politics. People are really aware of it and talk about it in Canada when you talk to a Canadian about politics, and if you ask them to summarize the parties, they'll sort of say, so there's a party that's, I don't remember what it's called, it's basically like Liberal Democrats, and it only gets voted, it's not what Justin Trudeau is right now, I don't think. And it pretty much gets votes from the city, and then there is a more center-left party that gets more votes. So the big thing is, I think right now, even though we have the internet, and theoretically everybody could be uploading stuff and talking to each other, I think we still have a fairly narrow range of people who are talking, and I think a lot of them happen to live in cities, and that's going to happen sort of demographically. And it's not just the internet, like I said, like this is huge in politics, and it's just something to be aware of. But what I think a lot of the disconnect is I think cities are getting more insular, and they're maybe not feeling some of the problems that rural areas are, or they've felt them so long that it doesn't seem as bad. And so that sort of, I think, contributes to, like I said, a sort of disconnect between people living in cities and people living in ruralities. I think there's a lot of people that are normally sympathetic to like things on the Democratic Party platform, or just greater abortion access, or increased single-payer health care, all that sort of stuff. I think there's a lot of people, and then they get turned off by other aspects of the platform. And I think in particular, the thing you're seeing right now, and a thing that could be really sort of important and potentially really bad for, liberalism in the United States, is I think people are getting disaffected from what they perceive of as the left in America because they hate identity politics. And I talked about that last time, and it took me a long time and a lot of thinking about it to sort of think about it in those terms, because it is true that you want to pass laws so that particular groups, basically as a general rule, disenfranchised groups, like I said before, have access to equality of opportunity. So if they don't have money, they could get scholarships to go to school, or if they have job placement programs. And I'm not saying anything specific, but basically having resources that you might recognize have to be disproportional in certain ways. And I think that you can have that and contribute to equality of opportunity. Getting a lot of blue. So this is this is the only layer I'm going to do of the blue, to change subject suddenly, of the blue across the whole thing. There's ways to get steadier washes. I don't really mind these blotchy guys, although we'll see. We'll see how these flowers look. I don't know. I think they're going to look a little blurry. But yeah, I mean, that was the basic thing, is sort of be conscious of where people are from and where they were educated. And it seems like the people making content, even on the internet now, should be more democratic and more responsive to... You do see, I think, more stuff coming from mid-sized cities. But there's a lot of people that vote Democratic in presidential elections and want a more fair society, and think that social justice is a real concern, but are turned off by a sort of authoritarian aspects of the centers of democratic politics. So it's like you have Los Angeles, and you have movie stars who are some of the least educated people, like in their income bracket, and then you have just Brooklyn, and New York City is a city that holds criminals who destroyed our economy. And so you can couch that as you like. You live in a place with access to all sorts of cool stuff and great colleges because you harbor people who siphon the money from everybody else. And so that's a thing I think to be aware of. And there's going to be places making stuff for defense contractors or whatever in rural places and like Pennsylvania or in the Northeast or whatever, and they contribute too, but New York City is not blameless. Like, New York City made Donald Trump. Donald Trump is an avatar of New York City. He could only exist in a place like New York City. And you can say that there's other politicians in other countries who are like him, but look more into those politicians. They might be sort of like him politically, but they don't have that particular personality that's so unique and so scary to a lot of people, probably rightfully so. Yeah, we're closing in on these flower guys. Like I said in the first video, I usually use a bigger brush than this. Watercolors usually use as big of a brush as they can get away with because it holds more paint and you get more consistency out of the brush. That makes sense. And one thing with using smaller brushes is sometimes it is necessary if you're getting really, really needle thin lines, but a lot of times the brushes split because they're just so small they can't hold a tip, and so getting used to using a round and just getting finer lines with it. I have a little contamination there. That's fine because there's going to be blue on there anyway. Yeah, well, this worked out well. I think I'm about done with that. I'm sure in rewatching this I'll think of more related stuff to say. Obviously I kind of just want to, I guess part of my whole goal is to just exhibit that a person can have varied opinions that they've thought about based on the real world, and you don't automatically have to prescribe to a set of axioms or a doctrine or a dogma. And if you're in a group that performs if you're in a group that requires complete adherence to a particular set of ideas, then that is not a great place to be, and it's not a good place to be as a citizen in a democracy or a democratic republic. Alright, well, cool beans. I'm gonna dry this off and then I'll be back. So I'm gonna get to a yellow. I dried off this blue. This paper's pretty decent. It doesn't buckle too much. It is 300 pounds, but it's pretty consistent with the other 300-pound paper I've used. I'm a little scared that I need to dilute this a bit. Alright. So I'm going to be kind of selective and do this in splotches for this part, because there's some of this which is going to look more bluer, wow, more blue, and some of it is going to look more green. I am, like I said in the last video, I am working off an image. But I think for the most part I'm probably just going to ignore it. There's a lot of parts that are black, and I'm going to try to keep doing this in a 3-color method, because it's really cheap to buy just 3 colors of professional paint, and I just wanted to show that even if you haven't done it a ton, which I haven't, and you're talking to people on the internet using a brush that's big, you can probably get alright results, at least maybe for your grandmother or something. Alright, I wanted to talk just briefly about watercolor paints. in the art market in general, a lot of times when you're getting into this stuff, you see stuff like student paint, or student grade paper, and it's made of the paper might be made of trees instead of cotton, and that's just not really good for watercolor. I certainly see why you would test paint out on inferior paper, but I think it's a little misleading to just like pretend it's watercolor paper. And the paint is kind of more confusing because it's not really a great deal, most of it, because it has filler in it, so you're going to have to use more paint. And so student grade paint is kind of a scam, and that's why the 3-color method, instead of buying a set of 14, 20 paints, just buying 3 pigments at first and then a couple at a time, and just researching. A really good website is I think it's called handprint.com, but you can search handprint watercolor and it will come up. That is actually, since this is going to be black right here, I can just go all the way over it. But I think I'm going to wait to put a magenta layer over it before I add more green or more yellow. I might end up doing a 2-color black, which isn't primary color, later, just because it's a lot quicker, and because that will probably still be several videos in the future, so it won't be moving too fast. Well, I wanted to talk about the Nation of Islam. And the reason I wanted to talk about the Nation of Islam is I noticed in listening, I have a friend who's really into hip-hop, and I listened to a lot of hip-hop with him over the past year or more, and a lot of the successful hip-hop artists are talk about and are in the Nation of Islam. And I don't really have anything definitive to say about it, except that it is distinct from Islam. It is to Islam what Mormonism is to Christianity, so it's like Islam with extra books. It's a lot newer and an American, or it was made in America, and I think that a big reason why the more successful rappers, or a lot of successful rappers, not just because of where they're from or because their family adhere to it, but I think you end up getting a lot who stay in the industry and keep working because there is, strict observers abstain from alcohol. And I think alcohol is pretty rough for creative careers. And yeah, so I think that's just a thing to think about, is that every group's different, and the NOI in particular is really different from Islam in another country. You can get, they might have connections with Islamic groups in other places, and undoubtedly they do, but part of the reason why I just think that it's one of the missing components of this debate, is sort of how positive maybe just that prohibition of alcohol in those poor neighborhoods or in those people's lives, just that component of it could have helped out tremendously. And so it's looking at, what do people believe in particular areas, or what do particular people believe in particular areas, and are there components of that, which is why they stick to it. And I think that that's probably a big component, is alcohol is a horrible drug, and mainstream culture. And so here's another thing, as I've heard it phrased, Nation of Islam, it's about respect. And you can get into the effect, but it's about respecting women and saying that the way the mainstream deals with women is in some way problematic. And then it's saying that, hey, also alcohol is kind of problematic. And these are two things that are under-discussed in the mainstream. And So that's basically why you don't need to have debates along I am this and therefore, when you can really just talk about the ideas. And your mind's not going to get changed by really poor reasoning. Like, someone's not, as long as like you have good reasoning for your ideas, someone's not going to just assault your beliefs and permanently change them, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you have good ideas, you will just know your reasoning is better in the future, and you'll be able to deal with that more proficiently in the future. That's about all I had to say about that. Yeah, I mean, like, KRS talks about it a lot. I mean, it would be sort of the Wu-Tang Clan, Lord Jamar, I think his name is, just a lot of dudes, and that's when you do research into it and you look at it, and you'll see that my analogy is pretty apt. It really is just, it is like Mormonism. It's that different. Mormonism is pretty different from mainline Christianity in a lot of ways. And yeah, the same is true for the Nation of Islam in regards to mainstream Islam. Well, cool beans. The coolest beans. I do have to say, as a general rule, just so people sort of know where I'm coming from, I think religion is bad. I think organized religion is mostly bad for people's thinking, because especially ones with afterlives, like, it's an extremely problematic thing to do to children, to tell them that they're going to go to hell. And it's tantamount to child abuse. But that's the thing, is I could have this discussion, and I could give my reasoning, and as long as the person isn't going to fly off the handle at me, like, I think you could have a discussion with a religious person about that. But yeah, like, I think we should be moving away from organized religion and faith systems. And so I'm not saying, yeah, I mean, that's one thing I think that bother a lot of people, is people are called bigots because they're critical of Islam, but these same people have been deeply critical of Christianity for like the entire time they've been talking on the internet, because the Christians are the people that they live with. And I mean, that was just where, and still is where, a lot of the discussion is. I mean, that is still what a lot of, I don't know, YouTube atheists focus on is Christians, because those are the people in the country they live with. Those are the people they live with in the country? Yeah, I don't know. That was a bit awkward. Oh, my next one. So, yeah, my next one was more stuff I've noticed on the internet, I guess. And this is that you have this Kekistan thing, which is the Pepe the Frog meme, and you have this connection with 4chan, and then I saw, specifically I'm talking about Sargon of Akkad and Jordan Peterson, I think both on Joe Rogan's podcast, talking about the Kek stuff, and sort of talking, so the problem with the whole thing is that when you actually go, so the thing is, these people who do it, it's a joke. They're doing it because they find it really funny and it's worth their time. A lot of it is probably because they keep eliciting a reaction. But yeah, go on to 4chan, check out Poll, check out /POL. It is mostly like Zionist world government shit. It's like Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's blatant racism. And so it's a little bit disingenuous, unless you've never looked at Poll, to just talk about Poll as like this functioning like internet democracy or meritocracy or whatever, where everyone's anonymous, and there's like, there's huge problems with it that the community doesn't really acknowledge, and that, from what I understand, people have left that website because of. And yeah, you just see this really gross anti-Semitic stuff that you didn't really see outside of white culture. Oh, wow. White culture. Like, when I was in high school, I used to check out Stormfront.org because white supremacists are crazy people, and it's like really interesting to see how these people think, because you want to compare yourself against those people and make sure you're never like them. And it's the same sort of stuff you would see posted on there, and it's just really blatant, like a lot of caricatures and stuff like that, and like Holocaust denial, and etc., etc. And that's sort of why I think people with more... When you go on YouTube right now, the suggestions just lead you to extremes. And I've noticed it, and I've heard other people point it out, but you get pushed towards extreme opinions. And YouTube will often push you towards, like, just blatantly, like, racist or horrible stuff. And I think part of it is because people that have more reasoned political, or maybe more, they feel like they're less represented, and they're sort of in the middle, and they basically don't want to be screamed at. And they don't want... I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want... I mean, one thing, like I've said before, a lot of the people that post videos do it with advertisements, which I think gives you a rough incentive. And there's no... Like, at first, I guess there's no easy way around that. But that's sort of breaking into anything right now, is you have to do a good amount of stuff for free before people pay attention to you. Cool beans. So yeah, that's just the thing, is a lot of it's really funny. Like, I'm not saying the what people would term as harassment, but if you look at the Internet Historian videos, they're really funny. And I think that they're funny, and I don't think that that guy is a bad guy. I don't think that if that guy became the king, everyone would be horrible serfs and women would be reduced to slavery. And I think he does this because he thinks it's funny, and he's probably annoyed by how edge groups act, but I can't really comment too much on his motivations. But there's aspects of it that are funny, but then the problem is there's all of this anti-Semitism, and so some of them are taking the things that are funny because they're absurd seriously, and you just sort of have this idea that for so many people, objective reality doesn't really... It's about their experience, and so you don't ever engage with the ideas seriously enough to think about politics seriously. It is just about... Like, I'm a 4chan user. Like, this, this triggers people, and I'm going to do it because it's funny. And just sort of continue trying to get that reaction out of people. Yeah. Well, so I put yellow most of the places where it's going to go. I still can't pronounce the chemical name of this yellow. I can pronounce it, I just can't remember it. It's lemon yellow for Daniel Smith, though. I did look that up. And it's Winsor yellow for Winsor Newton. It seems to be the place to be. It's light fast. It performs pretty well. It tints pretty well. It's yellow. And I think it's usually the case that yellow just doesn't have the tinting strength that, like, phthalo blue does, because what does? Yeah. Well, I think I'm gonna dry this off, and then I might move to a smaller brush and do some highlights on the magenta. That should be fantastic. And yeah, so I'm coming in with a magenta. I'm using a smaller brush because I've gotten scared. And I just want to do some... Oh, that's not enough pigment. That's not going to do. Let me get some more pigment. So the next thing I was going to talk about, I just had an interesting discussion. The next thing I'm going to talk about is body image. Oh no, the paint. And so, why I want to talk about this is because I think that there's all sorts of things that people talk about. And there's sort of this idea that a lot of times it's not specifically about what people say, but how they say it and who they're saying it to and like how they're acting. And I think a lot of it, I know for me, it really changed how I dealt with the outside world and other people, especially in more confrontational senses, really changed when my body image improved. And I weighed like 300 and I think I was, oh gosh, I think it was 22. I weighed 330 pounds. I lost like 110 pounds in 6-ish months because I stopped eating sugar and did some other stuff, but it's mostly the not eating sugar. I'll talk a little bit more about that because of my next topic. But the thing I wanted to focus on was just how different my experience was, because I was fat my whole life, and so how I thought about things and the difference in how I thought about things was pretty remarkable to me. And we live in a country where a lot of people are overweight. A lot of people that aren't overweight are still super self-conscious about their body because there is an industry. The way I think about it is that it is in the many industries' best image to, like fashion industries or beauty or jewelry, to make you think you don't look good or to make you not feel like you look sufficient, or like maybe just generally you need something, but a lot of times it's attached to your image. And so it seems to me a lot of times that this could be, we're just not political argumentation computers, and unless you think about it in really particular terms and you're really concerned about it, there could be all sorts of things that are messing up how you talk with other people. You could stream video debates with other people, but you only talk to them when you're hungry, and you're just always a jerk. And that just happens. We're there for eating and making more copies of ourselves, and we do other things kind of accidentally. So yeah, I'm doing some lines on this flower, and that's looking pretty good. That's looking like a good flower. And I mean, the ultimate thing is the body image in a lot of ways. I mean, look at Renaissance paintings. What's his name? Albrecht Dürer has a manual on drawing the human figure, and if you look at the different figures he draws, like, none of them look a lot like the generic human figures that you see figure methods teach you to draw now. Like, either really muscular people, thin people. Recently, people have been doing a better job drawing overweight people because there's more of them. But his body shapes were real weird, and the Renaissance ideal of women, at least pertaining to men, or the Renaissance ideals of beauty pertaining to women and men were a lot different than they are now. And so those things can change, and just knowing those things can change should at least free you a little bit from a concern about how other people or you maybe look, or think about how you look. So the related topic I was going to talk about, and this helps a lot with the last one, and this is the secret. I was gonna write a 70-page book where there's just like one paragraph on every page, which is one of those horrific scam books, sell it for $14.99, but then I realized I I have self-respect, so I can just tell you the secret right now, and it's eating lots of vegetables. So you're just gonna wanna eat lots of vegetables. Those will make you healthier, and that sounds really reductive, but think about this: you can only eat so much food. I've tried. There's a capacity. I'm pretty committed to eating lots of food whenever possible, because it's just real great. I love food. But if you spend more of that time eating food that has more nutrients in it and has less sort of empty energy, so less starches, you end up just eating more vegetables. And vegetables combined with oil and nuts, and I eat soy protein, which a lot of people talk about. Unsubstantiated claims about soy and how it's going to give you cancer, and how the Monsanto soy, it's going to make you a zombie. But I don't think it's going to make you a zombie, and it's probably eating like a leaner protein that's really easy to cook. You can get kettle cooked tofu, it's better. But yeah, eat the vegetables. If you're concerned with other people having undue amounts of control over how you live in your day-to-day lifestyle, or your day-to-day, I guess, eat more vegetables. Vegetables give you autonomy. I'm trying to work. I'm hoping that there's going to be like some sort of giant vegetable lobby I can work for sometime, and I want to make pro-vegetable propaganda. I think that would be pretty much the best job, is just telling people the glories of vegetables. There's these communist, I think they're Chinese, posters from I think the 60s or 70s, and it's about, they had like an alternative type of genetics, that was alternative to heredity, and they were going to make really giant vegetables, and there's posters of workers harvesting these giant vegetables, and that's pretty good stuff. But what wasn't good stuff was, the millions of people that died. So you get your ups and downs. One thing I think sort of generally, when I was talking before about how we're monkeys, and how we're here to make food and make more of us, and not necessarily to debate policy, is I think one of the biggest problems I see right now is that a lot of people don't really have a sense of humor, and you kind of got to have a sense of humor if you're going to deal with the real world, because the real world is constantly horrifying, and your understanding of that horror only ever expands. It doesn't really contrast unless you get dementia, or something similar. So it's best to be able to deal with that with the mechanism that our bodies provide, which is humor. And that's sort of, if you don't have a sense of humor, and you are presenting yourself as a person to be credible, as a person to be believed, but you don't have a sense of humor, there's a big segment of the population that's not going to listen to anything you say, because totalitarian states don't have a sense of humor. It's not. This is not. It's not reasonable to a lot of people that if. Yeah, I think that's about it. You can't overinflate. People can't be afraid. Comedians can't be afraid to make jokes. A comic in Canada is getting sued for shutting down hecklers, which is his job, and it seems successfully sued for shutting down hecklers, and that shouldn't be acceptable in a free society. It's just ridiculous. But that's about that for vegetables. I had one more thing to talk about. I think I can still lay some more magenta on. without having to dry the paper. So this is sort of starting to pop out, and I'm going to lay some magenta on this back bit and start to try to darken it. I'm probably going to do this white bit later with a 2-color black. And I might use the 2-color black to sharpen up some of this. But, you know, it's starting to look like a thing. That's, it sort of, yeah, it's cool how it comes out and the paint builds as you go forward in the process. And flowers are a good thing to draw because a lot of times they're just one color or 1 or 2 colors, and a lot of times those pigments are really close to pigments you can get paint in because maybe it's a natural version of the same pigment. Cool. Well, another thing I wanted to talk about is that I recently watched most of the films of John Carpenter. And John Carpenter, sort of what it strikes me, and there's sort of another related topic to him, which is the studio system in Hollywood and why people complain about that. John Carpenter makes really good movies. John Carpenter's made a couple more questionable movies. He's made a lot of movies that don't make a ton of money at first, and then people like them a lot more, like so-called cult classics or what have you, because a lot of what box office results are determined by is what other movies open that week, and not so much if it's the best, like how good the movie is. It's just like, oh, Braveheart also came out at this time, and you wrecked. A cool thing about John Carpenter is he made sort of blockbuster-y, he made kind of mainstream American movies, but he did it as a director, like with a vision. And he had particular things he wanted to say in the movies, and the movies are good, and the music's good, and he pays attention to the whole. To me, good directors or good movies, like, it could be the studio, it's people who pay attention to every component of it and don't really subcontract out important parts of making it. So Studio Ghibli does a really good job with Foley and with their soundtracks because they do it all in-house, and John Carpenter movies are really great for the same reasons. And so yeah, the studio discussion is John Carpenter has he's really slowed down. He made a movie in 2010, but he's really slowed down. He's probably going to make a television show or something because of all the Netflix stuff, but I'm not really up on the up and up. But he's really fed up with the studio system. He's said these things, and you can see it in his movies, and you can see in a lot of his worst movies where it went wrong. So one of his worst movies is Ghosts of Mars, which is one of his, like, there was The Ward was most recent, and then I think this was his second most recent. That movie is hot trash. That movie could be alright, and you can see where it could have been alright, because if you, like, look up the Wikipedia, initially the casting was going to be different, but the studio insisted that Ice Cube be one of the leads, and the guy can't act. Like, he can't act. And Jason Statham was going to be that character, but he had to they had to rewrite it so that Ice Cube could be that character. And it's like, Jason Statham later made really successful action movies after that, and Ghost of Mars is an action movie. One thing I really appreciate about John Carpenter movies is his commentary on the cigarette stuff. At the Mouth of Madness, the main character repeatedly tries to smoke a cigarette and is stopped either by his environment or by another person, and it's just sort of, there was this huge push to, really a censorship push to take cigarettes out of movies. I almost said off the silver screen. I really hate using useless metaphors. So that's usually why I hesitate when I'm talking, is because I don't want to use a worn out cliche. Cool beans. And yeah, so I am of course recording all of this on an analog reel-to-reel, and so I occasionally need to stop. I need to turn the coal ovens off. I need to change the tape. I need to change the flash bulbs. I need to pay the man that, runs the crank. And so I'm just going to do that, and then I'll be right back. Alright. I lost my brush. I found it. I was talking about John Carpenter. I talked about Ghost of Mars. There's bits about that movie that are cool, or are good. I kind of like the soundtrack. I like how janky some of the special effects are. But that's sort of I guess that the argument is that people that operate in systems, like a studio system or a film production system more broadly, are resources. John Carpenter is a resource. He'll make good movies. He might occasionally make a less good movie, but if you just continue that investment and you give him creative control, you're probably going to net money, because he sometimes makes a movie that's really huge, like Halloween or They Live, or yeah, there's another really big one. So that's sort of what bothers people about the studio system, is why not do both? Why not make your trash Transformers movie to sell to overseas markets, and then give someone a fraction of the money to make a better movie that's going to net you more money over 10 years. Like, people are going to want that movie for decades and decades, and it might be disproportionately. It might be a really good investment. And so it's just this really narrow view, or, yeah, I mean, just sort of what comes out of Hollywood is closing down theaters because people don't really go to see movies locally as much, because I think a lot of people that would just don't see a lot of good movies come to the theaters. And good movies still come out, and it seems like more good movies are coming out now than 10 years ago, probably because of crowdfunding, but probably provably because of crowdfunding. But yeah, there's a lot of people whose careers who just didn't get to make, George Romero, who didn't get to make as many good movies as they could have made because the resources weren't given to them, because they should have been better self-promoters, or they should have been something better at something else that's not making a movie. And they should have been better at making friends. They should have been better at the local culture, and it's just not an efficient way to make good movies. And other countries have state-sponsored film boards that give people money to make movies. And sometimes you make trash. Uwe Boll makes a lot of movies in Germany. Uwe Boll? I think that's it. And he does it because if he loses money, he gets his money back because of German law. And you might get Uwe Bolls, but you'll also get people making good movies that have resources they wouldn't otherwise get. A lot of times really good stuff gets made with foreign funding. Stop Making Sense, I think it was. I forget. I think was a French production. I'm thinking of the Twin Peaks movie. Sorry everyone. The Twin Peaks movie required money from a French company, and that you see that a lot. Or the Film Board of Canada will partially fund a movie, and it is our primary export. We don't make anything anymore. Throw money at this. This is the thing, is if you want to keep capitalism running. If you want capitalism, keep it going, you know? It's not that you can just, this is stuff worth investing in. This is stuff that's just as worth subsidizing as corn or solar panels. You could argue about solar panels, but really it is our primary export, and we want people to have our culture. We want our culture to be superimposed over other people's culture so they fight us less. This is the foundation of how we have historically thought about politics, about international relations, and it has been what worked the best. If you were for the European Union, that is what works the best. So yeah, it seems like that's a far away from John Carpenter, but it's not. Movies and art, for a lot of people, are a really huge deal, and they make money too. And especially now when you can sort of digitize it and you can make money off of it forever, and you're starting to see better investment, but I mean, it's coming from places like Netflix and not these people who traditionally have all the money. And why? Why do these outside groups, why does Amazon have to fund television shows that people really like them, but they couldn't have gotten made 10 years ago because it was seen as too niche? And why can't you adapt to a changing market when that's your job? You are beholden to your shareholders to make all your money so that everyone can roll in money. And, get on that. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of dark areas. So I'm going to just start going over here. This is putting magenta, or this is magenta. So I'm going to bet some right here. Bet. There it goes. And that looks very outlandish right now. But when we layer more onto it, it will get darker and darker. I'm going to switch to the larger brush. Yeah, well, cool. I'm going to just do a little bit more. I just generally, I think that watercolor is a really cool medium. I don't know if I have anything more to say. I don't know why, but I really want to talk about Jimmy Buffett, but I don't have anything good to say about Jimmy Buffett. And you know what they say. If you don't have anything good to say about Jimmy Buffett, I don't really know what they say after that. But, yeah. These flowers are starting to look good. I think this is pretty close to the flower from the picture, and looking at these flowers in silhouette sort of makes me think that they're probably what, like, the European romanticized heart is based off of, which is pretty cool, because they look more like that heart shape than actual hearts do. So I'm going to darken up around these guys, and it's going to be a bit tricky. I need to avoid these white areas. I'm going to try to retain some of those, maybe even them out with a heavy line later, which will make it a little bit cartoony and a little bit less like the real thing, but we'll end up adding definition to the overall image. Yeah, I try to keep I think one thing is people talk a lot about politics right now, and it's because it seems like people have things, oh, there was a whole thing I wanted to talk about. But, yeah. And I think part of that is because a lot of people feel like the polity is in trouble, and they need to be more active. And compared to how actively people have thought about politics in the past, this is probably not a bad thing. It's just, like I said, it seems like only certain extremes are represented, and a lot of the people that have more moderate opinions probably have better things to do. But I've thought about it a lot, and it seems like this is how people talk to each other about politics now. Like, this is, you don't write a book. You don't write a book about your political ideas and you don't like go to meetings, because everything is so much more decentralized, and for people living in more rural areas, there aren't meetings to go to, and you don't necessarily want to go to a group just to be told to have access to someone's beliefs. And I think if people just talk honestly about the specifics of what they believe, then the only people who, like, if people really persistently are criticizing them and making stuff up and trying to destroy their reputation, those people will eventually discredit themselves. The problem is they will perpetually replace themselves too. And, I mean, there's people representing almost every point of view that fall into this sort of caustic category that isn't really great for discussion. But the way I've seen a lot of it going, with either people taking more extreme viewpoints, a lot of websites just shut off their comment sections, or if you comment, you have to comment with Facebook, which is dreadful and bad for your brain, or you have to comment with Google Plus, and like, I don't know, man, maybe on the Airsoft forum you don't want to, or on an Airsoft website, or like bullets.com or something, or whatever, or like Adam and Eve, like you don't want to talk, you don't want to comment with your real name. I'm sure Adam and Eve has an integrated comment section, but yeah, it's like there's reasons to have anonymity besides that you're a criminal. Like, the argument that you should be fine if you have nothing to hide, like, it's not a good argument. And removing people's ability to be anonymous on the internet is not the end-all solution, I don't think. You see people commenting with their Facebooks and their Google Plus accounts saying really caustic, horrible shit, and they say it with their real names attached because they don't care. There's people that they really hold these positions and they will defend them, and they don't have good reasoning. But if you can't get past the disgust that, like, the things they're saying and cause you to feel, you can't. The best thing you can do is just to appear unfazed and then continue to talk to them. And, like, some of them are just trolling you, some of them are trying to get a response, but a lot of them on Facebook, I mean, that's the thing. If this is a person you know in real life, talk to them in real life. Hold them accountable in real life to their beliefs. Like, don't do it in a confrontational way, but if this is a person you see regularly, if it's not, it sort of lends the whole question to what is the Facebook? What is the utility of a website where you associate yourself with people that you don't like because you feel like you have to? So yeah, I mean, there's people whose minds you can't change. If they don't know your character, they don't see you regularly, you might never be able to change their minds. But if it's a person you work with and you're concerned about their behavior, there's a better way to talk about it than like a Facebook wall post fight or whatever. This magenta, wow, look at that. That pigment was a little heavy at first. So, I'm decently happy with how this is turning out. You can still see some of the graphite lines. It doesn't look like where I scrubbed it, the graphite's any less. I probably just peeked my head in the... where I scrubbed it, the graphite's like I had any paint problems. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. Well, I'm going to talk to you folks later. I'm going to talk to different folks, though, probably pretty soon. Yeah, this is looking real good. These flowers, we're going to meet our goal, and this time the we is appropriate, because hopefully everyone's painting their own flowers. And this flower painting is going to make one person moderately happy for a little while, or at least they're going to pretend they like it, and that's gonna take away the pain for just a few minutes, and that's gonna help a lot. And yeah, I hope you guys have a good day.